I stood by the window, watching the gray London sky, thinking about how much my life had changed over the past few years. I'm 39, an architect, but my work no longer brings me joy. The projects have become monotonous. Every building seems a reflection of the last. And my marriage to James, oh, it's become routine. We seem to have lost that spark that once bound us together. Suddenly the phone rang. It was my childhood friend, Emma. We hadn't spoken in years, but her voice sounded familiar and warm. She asked me for a favor. Her son Tom was moving to London to attend university and needed some support settling in. I thought, perhaps this could be an opportunity for me to distract myself from the emptiness that had enveloped my life. I agreed. James, my husband, supported the idea. He said it would help me, maybe even inspire me. We decided to meet Tom at the airport. When I hung up the phone, I felt a strange excitement. It seemed as if something new was already on the threshold of my life, and I wanted to find out what it would be. The airport was bustling with people, everyone hurrying to their gates or meeting their loved ones. James stood next to me, glancing around, while I tightly held a sign with the name Tom. I felt a slight nervousness, trying not to pay too much attention to it. Emma had said that her son had grown up and changed a lot, but I couldn't imagine just how much. And then, in the crowd of passengers, I saw him. Tall, lean, with short-cropped chestnut hair, Tom looked completely different from how I remembered. He walked with confidence, a bag slung over his shoulder, and his gaze was full of energy. A grown, attractive young man, full of ambition and some kind of inner strength. When he came closer and saw us, his face lit up with a smile. He rushed over and hugged me, firmly and unexpectedly warmly. I felt my heart beat faster. This unexpected contact made me feel both embarrassed and strangely excited, which I tried to hide. My gaze met James's, who seemed not to have noticed anything unusual, and I tried to regain my composure. On the way home, Tom talked about his plans and dreams. His eyes sparkled as he spoke of his future, of his desire to study and grow in London. He talked about the books he had read, the courses he wanted to enroll in, and the people he hoped to meet. There was such a passion for life, for new discoveries in his words, that I couldn't help but admire his energy. I caught myself thinking that I enjoyed listening to him, that I wanted to learn more about him. And this young man, my friend's son, suddenly seemed to be a source of something fresh and new, something that had been sorely missing in my own life. I smiled at him through the rearview mirror, trying not to show my thoughts. A fleeting thought crossed my mind. Well, London seems to be waiting for you, Tom, and perhaps not just you. From the very first day, Tom brought fresh air into our home. His energy, enthusiasm, and openness gradually began to refresh the atmosphere. James noticed that I was smiling more often and seemed to take everyday concerns more lightly. Tom quickly adapted to living with us, and his presence began to feel natural, even necessary. I found myself enjoying his company, perhaps too much. I watched with interest as he unpacked his things, organized his space, and listened attentively to me when I spoke about my work or weekend plans. Occasionally, I noticed his gaze lingered on me longer than it should, but I tried not to give it much thought. One morning, while cleaning the house, I got down on all fours to wipe the floor under the table in the living room. Suddenly, glancing at the mirror in the corner of the room, I noticed Tom's reflection. He was standing behind me, holding his phone aimed in my direction. I realized he was taking pictures of me from behind. My heart started pounding, but I forced myself not to show that I had noticed. I continued cleaning, trying to keep my face neutral, even though everything inside me was turning upside down. What was he doing? Why? The unexpected situation caused a wave of embarrassment, but I tried to maintain my composure, pretending nothing had happened. As I continued to clean, I caught his reflection glancing at me. Tom quickly averted his eyes, then pretended to be occupied with something else. I couldn't shake the thought of what had happened all day. Later that evening, while walking past his room, I noticed the door was slightly ajar. I peeked inside and saw Tom sitting on his bed, holding his phone. Judging by the look on his face, he was engrossed in something on the screen. I tensed up, and my heart began to beat faster. I recognized those very photos. His fingers moved slowly over the screen, and I realized he was using them for his fantasies. I froze, shocked, and unexpectedly aroused. My cheeks flushed. The moment lasted only a few seconds, but felt like an eternity. I forced myself to walk away without revealing my presence, but my thoughts were already swirling, stirring new, unsettling emotions. Tom had started playing a game, one where I didn't know the rules. And, as wrong as it was, something inside me suddenly wanted to learn those rules. The next day, I couldn't shake the thoughts of what I had seen last night. Tom, his focused gaze, his face filled with desire. It wouldn't leave my mind. There was something forbidden about it, something that made my heart beat faster. I decided I could no longer stay on the sidelines. I needed to understand where the real boundaries lay. I went to the shower, deliberately leaving the door slightly ajar. Hot water flowed down my body, and I could feel my thoughts circling around a single idea. I called out, "Tom, could you bring me a towel, please?" The house was silent for a moment. I began to wonder if he had heard me, but soon I heard his footsteps approaching the bathroom. He opened the door slightly and awkwardly peered in, trying not to look directly at me. His eyes darted around the room, and the hand holding the towel trembled slightly. I took the towel from his hands but didn't rush to wrap myself in it. Instead, I slowly stepped out of the shower, allowing the water to drip off me, and walked so close to Tom that his shirt got wet from the splashes. I felt his body tense up and saw him flinch in surprise. Our bodies were on the verge of touching, so close that I could sense his uneven breathing. I slowly wrapped the towel around myself, feeling his gaze on me, and walked past him, leaving Tom standing in the doorway, unsure of what to do next. I noticed his clothes were slightly damp, and it gave me a strange sense of satisfaction. Tom stood still, as if unable to move, and I enjoyed his awkwardness and my own feeling of control. Adrenaline coursed through my veins, and I felt the desire to continue this game growing inside me. "Thank you, Tom," I said with a smile, walking past him, trying to keep my voice calm and casual. I knew I had left him bewildered, and it only fueled my curiosity about how far this dangerous game could go. That evening, I stood in front of the mirror, choosing what to wear. I pulled out a tight dress that I rarely wore. It hugged every curve of my body, outlining my figure, making it even more alluring. I deliberately chose this dress to see how Tom would react. I could feel the tension between us, and I wanted to heat it up even more. When I came down to the living room, Tom was already sitting on the sofa, getting ready to watch a movie. I noticed how his gaze lingered on me a little longer than usual, and a faint hint of embarrassment crossed his face. I sat down next to him, so close that our knees almost touched. I pretended to be fully absorbed in the movie, although in reality, my thoughts were elsewhere. After a while, pretending to be uncomfortable sitting, I smoothly shifted my body, laying my head on his lap. I could feel his muscles tense with surprise, his breath becoming slightly more irregular. I looked up and met his gaze, surprised, yet excited at the same time. He didn't know how to react, but I could see he liked what was happening. Our bodies touched, and I could feel the tension between us growing. I moved a little closer, and my hair lightly brushed against his hand. The room was quiet. Only the sounds of the movie playing in the background accompanied us. Tom sat still, his body seemingly frozen, but his eyes were fixed on me. At some point, he couldn't hold back any longer. I felt him carefully lean towards me, his lips coming closer, and then our lips met in a passionate kiss. At first, it was soft, as if he was afraid of making a wrong move, but then his hand slid to my neck, and the kiss grew deeper, more demanding. I felt my lips part to meet his, and a wave of desire washed over my body. His hands began to explore my body, first hesitantly, then more boldly. His touch was greedy, yet tender at the same time. I couldn't resist it. My own desire flared up with new intensity. I felt how every gesture, every touch excited me more, and a burning desire to continue sparked inside me, despite everything. I knew I was playing with fire, but I couldn't stop anymore. His hands enveloped me, and I allowed myself to sink into the moment, forgetting everything around me. James came home early in the morning, exhausted after an overnight shift at work. He had been working on a new project, and it had taken all his strength and time. When he entered the house, I noticed how his gaze stopped on me and Tom. We were sitting at the kitchen table, trying to have a normal conversation, but the tension between us was almost palpable. James seemed to sense the strange atmosphere but couldn't understand its cause. He sighed, leaning back in his chair, and said, "I think we all need a little distraction. How about a weekend trip to Rome? We haven't gone anywhere for a while." His suggestion caught me off guard. I didn't know what to say, but I immediately saw how Tom's eyes lit up with interest. He nodded in agreement, and I tried to smile and agree, though inside, everything was turning upside down with uncertainty. A few days later, we went to Rome. James had booked one hotel room with separate beds to save money, as he explained. We checked in, and I immediately felt the situation heating up. Tom tried not to look at me, but I caught his glances in the mirror's reflections. Everything became even more intense when we found ourselves in the confined space of the room. In the evening, we took a walk around the city, enjoying its nighttime beauty, and returned to the room quite late. James fell asleep quickly, tired after long hours of work and the walk. I lay in my bed, feeling the tension and desire only growing stronger. I stared at the ceiling for a long time until I made a decision that made my heart beat faster. I carefully got up and, trying not to make a sound, approached Tom's bed. He was lying on his back, his eyes open. I didn't say a word. I just slipped under the blanket next to him. His body tensed with surprise, but he didn't pull away. Our hands met under the covers, and I felt his breathing quicken. We began to play a silent, passionate game. His hands slowly slid over my body, exploring every line and curve. I closed my eyes, enjoying his touch, feeling the desire growing inside me. We tried not to make a sound, but I felt my lips curl into a smile when his hand touched my waist. Suddenly, unable to hold back, I made a soft but too loud sound that echoed through the room. I froze, holding my breath, and saw James stir slightly in his bed. My heart pounded wildly in my chest. We both froze, fearing that our madness would be revealed. James woke up from the noise. I felt his gaze, full of confusion, land on my bed and then on the empty space where I was supposed to be. My heart tightened in my chest. He slowly turned toward Tom's bed, and his face began to flush with anger. He saw me, panicking, trying to hide under the blanket next to Tom. I froze, trying to cover myself, but it was too late. Our eyes met, and in his gaze I saw a flash of fury I couldn't have predicted. "What the hell is this?" he shouted, his voice booming in the silence of the room. Tom tensed up. His face turned pale. He didn't know what to say, and I felt my breath becoming more ragged, words sticking in my throat. James came closer, his face red with rage. "I demand an explanation," he shouted again. I remained silent, not knowing what to say, and Tom stayed frozen in place. A heavy tension hung in the air. "If you think I'm going to let this go, you're very wrong," James continued, his voice trembling with anger. "You will both pay for this, and I will make sure your lives become a living hell." I felt a wave of panic rise inside me. The secret I had tried so hard to keep was out. James knew everything, and now he was determined to destroy whatever we had. "Get out of here," James yelled at Tom. Tom slowly rose from the bed, his face filled with regret and fear. He cast one last pained glance at me and headed for the door, trying to avoid further conflict. James kept his eyes fixed on me. "I want a divorce," he said in a cold tone, his voice sounding like a sentence. "And I promise you, Laura, you will regret everything that has happened. I will do everything to make you pay for this." I sat still, feeling my heart pounding in my chest. I realized my worst fears had come true. Our game was over, and now the consequences were inevitable. From the moment James discovered the truth, he began to act with astonishing speed. I barely had time to grasp the scale of the disaster before the consequences started raining down on me. James had always had many connections in the architectural community, and he used them without the slightest hesitation. A few days after our confrontation, I went to the office, ready for a regular workday. But instead of the usual looks from my colleagues, I felt something different. A cold detachment, whispers behind my back. Soon, I was called into my boss's office. His face was tense, and I immediately knew something was wrong. "Laura, we've received several complaints about you," he said, trying to maintain an official tone, but there was discomfort in his eyes. "The company has decided to terminate our collaboration. I'm sorry." I froze, not believing what I was hearing. How could this happen? I was sure I was doing my job at a high level, but everything became clear when I found out that James had used his connections to get me fired. He spread rumors and false accusations, destroying my reputation in the professional community. I returned home, feeling completely shattered, and this was only the beginning. Soon, I learned that James had told all our mutual friends about my betrayal. The phone was silent, as if no one wanted to have anything to do with me anymore. I stopped receiving invitations to parties I used to attend. I had become an outcast in my own circle. But worst of all, James had used his connections to freeze my bank accounts. I discovered this when I tried to withdraw money from an ATM and saw a transaction denied message on the screen. At first, I didn't understand what had happened, but then everything became clear. He knew I depended on that money and decided to cut off my access to it completely. I found myself in complete isolation. My job, my reputation, my finances, everything was destroyed by James, and he clearly didn't intend to stop there. I felt like my past was collapsing like a house of cards, and there was nothing I could do about it. Every day brought new blows. I had become a stranger in my own world, and the only thing I could do was try to survive in this chaos. Now I knew that the game I had gotten involved in had much more severe consequences than I could have imagined. I stood in the middle of a small apartment in an old building in a less prestigious area of London. The cold seeped through the thin walls, and the few pieces of furniture I managed to bring took up nearly all the available space. This place had nothing in common with the home I once knew, and every corner reminded me of how far I had fallen. Now, I found myself among people who did not know my past. In their eyes, I was just a new neighbor in a modest apartment, one of many faces passing by in the gray routine of everyday life. Perhaps it was better this way. I saw no judgment or pity, only indifference. Here, at least, I could try to start over, even if inside, everything screamed with pain. To survive, I found a job at a small cafe on the corner. This place was far from the prestigious job I had once been proud of. Now I served coffee and cleaned tables, trying not to think about how low I had fallen. Sometimes, I caught myself realizing that my hands no longer held the confidence with which I used to draw lines on blueprints. Instead, they trembled from fatigue and stress. Every day at work, I realized more and more that my life would never be the same. The game I decided to play with Tom had destroyed everything I had built over the years. I had lost not only my career, but also my name, my confidence, and my previous place in life. Every action I took, every choice I made led me to this moment, to this place where I had to start again, but without any clear path ahead. I looked at my reflection in the cafe window and barely recognized the woman I used to be. I had to admit that I had backed myself into this corner, and now my future was uncertain and frightening. I realized that every action has its consequences, and for my impulsiveness and desire to play with fire, I was paying the full price. Emma arrived in London unexpectedly. I found out from her message. She asked me to meet. Her words sounded strange, worried, insistent. I couldn't understand what exactly was troubling her until we met. She looked tired and tense, and her eyes were filled with concern. "Laura, I need to talk to you," she said as soon as we sat down at a table in a small cafe. I felt my heart tighten with anxiety. Deep down, I already knew where this conversation was headed. "I don't understand what's happening with Tom. He's become so distant, cold. I've never seen him like this," Emma continued, looking me straight in the eyes. "And I came here to find out what happened." I froze. Words caught in my throat, and the air around me seemed to grow heavy and thick. I knew I couldn't hide the truth any longer. Emma had been my friend for years, and I understood that I could no longer lie. "Emma, I have to tell you something," I began, unable to withstand her piercing gaze. "Tom and we had an affair. It got out of control." Emma was stunned for a moment, and then her face flushed with anger. How could you?" she whispered, clenching her fists. "He's still too young, too naive to understand what's happening. And you, Laura, you should have known better. You were his mentor, his friend." Her words hit like blows. "You've ruined everything," she continued, almost shouting. "You've destroyed his trust. You've destroyed our friendship. How could you be so reckless, so selfish?" I couldn't respond. Tears welled up in my eyes, and I felt guilt rising within me with every word she spoke. All I could do was silently listen to her accusations, feeling my life crumble even more with each one. "I thought I could trust you," Emma said, her voice trembling with emotion. "But now I see I was wrong." She stood up, casting a final look at me, full of disappointment and pain. "You've ruined our friendship, Laura, and I'm not sure I can ever forgive you for this." She left, leaving me alone among the sounds of the cafe and strangers' conversations. I sat still, feeling guilt and loneliness consume me even more. Emma was right. I had made an irreparable mistake, and now I had to live with its consequences. Several weeks passed after my conversation with Emma, and I hadn't heard any news about Tom. I tried not to think about him, but every thought kept returning to the moment when everything went wrong. I had already lost so much: my job, my friends, my reputation, and now I realized that I had lost Tom too. I learned that he had decided to go abroad to study. This decision didn't surprise me. He had always been ambitious and aspired to more, but now I knew his escape was also driven by our reckless affair. He wanted to forget what had happened and start anew, far away from me, far from London. The news left me with a feeling of final loss. I had lost not only everything I loved and relied on, but also the last connection to the world that was once mine. I was left alone in this vast, cold city, which now felt foreign and hostile. I had to learn to live again. Every morning I woke up with a heaviness in my chest, realizing that my old life was gone. My world had collapsed, and I had to build a new one, step by step. I felt my mistakes hanging over every move I made, like a shadow I couldn't escape. One day, as I was walking down the street, trying not to notice the people around me, I heard a familiar voice. I turned around and saw George, an old friend I hadn't seen in years. He was an artist, always living in his own world of creativity and art. We started talking, and I felt, for the first time in a long while, that I didn't want to run away. He noticed my state and asked how I was. I couldn't hide my pain and told him everything. George listened without interrupting, and then he suggested I try my hand at art. "Try painting, Laura," he said. "Express your feelings on canvas. Don't keep them inside." At first, the idea seemed strange to me. I had never considered myself a creative person. But maybe this was exactly what I needed. I agreed, and George gave me everything I needed: brushes, paints, canvases. I started slowly, hesitantly, but soon noticed how each stroke of the brush brought me relief. I poured my emotions, my fears, and my pain onto the canvas, and it became a form of therapy for me. Painting became my salvation. It gave me a way to express what I couldn't say in words. Every brushstroke was a step toward healing, an attempt to find myself again. I knew there was still a long way to go, but for the first time in a long time, I felt I could move forward, that I wasn't entirely lost. The realization that I needed to understand my feelings and the reasons behind my actions didn't come immediately. At first, I just tried to survive, immersing myself in work and painting, using it as a way to vent my emotions. But inside, there was still chaos. I knew I needed something more to truly begin healing. I decided to see a therapist. It wasn't easy, admitting that I needed help. But I realized I could no longer handle it on my own. At the first session, I felt awkward, almost on the verge of tears, trying to explain why I was there. My therapist, a woman with kind eyes and a calm voice, listened attentively without interrupting, and even that brought a small sense of relief. With each new session, I delved deeper into my emotions, into my motives. I began to understand that my actions with Tom were not driven by genuine feelings for him. It was more of a desperate desire to feel alive, desired, to feel the passion I had lost in my routine life. I was searching for something to bring back my sense of significance and importance, and Tom became a convenient target for this projection. These realizations were painful. I had to admit that I had used Tom to fill a void I didn't even fully understand myself. And while it made me feel even more guilty, it also freed me from my illusions. Now I saw my behavior from a different perspective, as an attempt to cope with the inner emptiness, the sense of meaninglessness that had consumed me over the past few years. My therapist suggested finding new ways to rebuild my self-esteem and confidence. I began to think about what brought me joy, what made me feel strong and independent. I continued painting, but now, not just as a form of therapy, but as a way to explore myself, my emotions, and my fears. I started paying more attention to my health, both physical and emotional. Small steps, like morning walks in the park or meditating before bed, gradually began to bring me back to life. I also decided to go back to studying. I enrolled in courses on art and psychology to better understand how the human mind works and how creativity can be used for healing. I wanted not only to heal myself, but also to perhaps help others who found themselves in a similar situation. My path to healing was long and arduous, but I realized I was finally finding ways to rebuild my life, without illusions and empty desires. I began to feel stronger than ever before, and knew there were still many opportunities ahead that I needed to seize. A year had passed since I began seeing a therapist and immersed myself in painting. It had been a difficult year, but it was also a time of change and growth. Gradually, I began to feel my strength returning, even discovering a new sense of purpose. By embracing my vulnerability, I was able to open new doors for myself and find my place in the world again. One autumn day, I received an offer to teach at an art school. I hesitated a little, but decided to take the challenge. From the very first day, I felt how art and teaching filled me with new meaning. Working with young artists, I saw in their eyes the same fire that had once burned in mine. I felt fulfilled when I could inspire and guide them, share my experience, and help them unlock their creative potential. This was my new mission, and I found genuine satisfaction in it. One evening, as I sat at my desk sorting through student work, I noticed an envelope among the mail. There was no return address, but I recognized the handwriting. It was from Tom. My heart stopped for a moment before I tore open the envelope and began to read. In the letter, he wrote about his new experiences, about how he had managed to start a new life abroad. He mentioned that he had found his place, that studying and new acquaintances had helped him see many things in a new light. And then he wrote about us. Tom admitted that he had spent a long time thinking about what had happened between us and had come to understand that it was a mistake. I realized that we were both looking for something we couldn't find within ourselves, he wrote. And perhaps it was more about ourselves than about each other. I forgive you, Laura, and I hope you can forgive yourself too. I put the letter down, feeling a strange sense of relief spread through my chest. Those words seemed like a period at the end of a story that had long been unsettling me. Tom was right. We were both searching for something we couldn't find within ourselves, and we had used each other in that search. But now it was time to let it go. I realized that I needed to let go of the past and focus on creating a better future for myself. My journey wasn't over, and there were still many steps ahead. But now I knew I was ready to move forward without looking back. I felt a strength within me that I hadn't noticed before, and knew there were still many opportunities for growth and happiness ahead. A few months had passed since I received Tom's letter. Time seemed to stretch out, but it was the time I truly needed for reflection and understanding. I thought a lot about my past, my mistakes, and what exactly had led me to the point where I had almost lost everything. I came to an important realization. I no longer wanted to live dependent on others' opinions or seek external validation of my worth. I decided to start living honestly, first and foremost, honestly with myself. I stopped caring about what others thought of me and focused on what truly mattered to me. It was difficult to let go of old habits and fears, but each day I felt myself finding the strength to move forward. I began a new chapter in my life, filled with determination and self-belief. I knew I would have to face many challenges, but I was no longer afraid of them. Instead, I saw them as opportunities for growth and self-discovery. Now, I realized that every difficulty was a chance to become better and wiser. Teaching at the art school brought me not only satisfaction but also a new understanding of what I truly wanted to do. I learned to enjoy the process of teaching and interacting with others, not seeking their approval, but simply enjoying the moment and sincerely sharing my knowledge. I began to strive for more sincere and honest relationships, both with others and with myself. I no longer hid my feelings and desires, nor was I afraid of being vulnerable or making mistakes. For the first time in a long time, I felt I had found inner freedom. I realized that I didn't need to be perfect or meet someone else's expectations to be happy. Now, I could simply allow myself to be who I am, with all my flaws, fears, and dreams. I knew that many challenges still lay ahead, but now I was ready to face them with my head held high and an open heart. My past was no longer a heavy burden. It had become a lesson that had helped me grow stronger and wiser. Now, I was ready to build my future based on honesty, love, and respect for myself and others. I decided to live without looking back, without fear of moving forward. And this new start, filled with confidence and faith in myself, became the beginning of a true life.